My father abandoned me for a spiritual retreat with my stepsister because he wants to be a good father to her, but my grandmother is on a mission to find her boom boom toy. Let me give you some context. My name is Denise, I'm 21, a university student, and now I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this mess. First, let me tell you how I ended up in this situation. I didn't see the car coming when I crossed the street last week. One minute, I was walking back from class, and the next, I was on the ground with my leg twisted in a direction it shouldn't be. It wasn't even my fault. A guy ran a red light, and now I'm stuck in this hospital, dealing not only with physical pain, but with everything else tearing me apart. After the accident, the first person I thought to call was my dad. I wasn't asking for much, just that he come to the hospital, be with me, and give me some support because I felt pretty helpless. But when I called him, he gave me the same cheap excuse as always, leaving me aside for his favorite stepdaughter, Stacy. He told me he couldn't come because the next day he was leaving with Stacy on a mental peace retreat that he'd already half paid for. Stacy, a 23-year-old adult, should be able to handle herself, right? Well, no. My dad said he promised her he would go with her and that she really needed him. And I guess I'm supposed to manage on my own. Yes, his stepdaughter needed him, but what about his actual daughter who just broke her leg? Am I just supposed to be fine alone? I thought it would hurt less over time that he always prioritized her over me, but it doesn't. Every time I try to get close, hoping that maybe this time he'll choose me, he ends up choosing Stacy. The worst part is that I could really use his help now, not just emotionally but also financially. Hospital bills aren't cheap, and as a college student, my savings don't go far. I swallowed my pride and asked him to help me with the hospital expenses. Guess what he said? That he only had enough money to cover the costs of the trip and the rest of the retreat. Plus, he explained how important the retreat was for Stacy's peace of mind, and that I should understand she needed the money more. Of course, here we go again with Stacy's mental health. Let me tell you a little about that while we're at it. Stacy has been faking anxiety attacks ever since she came into our lives. It's her favorite trick to get what she wants or manipulate my dad into doing what she wants. Every time I try to talk to him about something important, she conveniently has a crisis, and he rushes to her rescue as if she's the center of the universe. It's frustrating. And now, instead of being here with me when I really need him, he's off playing hero again. It's disgusting. I guess I should have seen it coming. My dad has been this way since he married my stepmother, Claudia. I still remember when things were different, before my mom got sick. Here's a bit of history so you can better understand my family dynamic and why all this hurts so much now. My parents had an arranged marriage, organized by my grandmother Jane, who is basically the family matriarch. My dad never really loved my mom, at least not the way a husband should love his wife. He simply went along with the marriage because he didn't want to upset my grandmother. She's wealthy and has been living off her money for years, has never had a real job, and has spent his life floating along with the allowance she gives him. Everything changed when my mom got sick. Dad was almost never home, and when he was cold and distant. It wasn't long before he started seeing Claudia in secret. Claudia was already pregnant by the time my mom passed away, and it still hurts to know that while my mom was fighting for her life, he was starting a new relationship with someone else. He didn't even wait to get married to Claudia. Barely a month after my mom died, he signed the papers at City Hall, making it official. But it seems the universe has a cruel way of balancing things. Claudia's pregnancy was complicated, and both she and the baby died during childbirth, leaving my dad with Stacy, the daughter from one of Claudia's previous relationships. That's when my life started going downhill. It seemed like Stacy became his new purpose, his chance at redemption, and he poured everything into her, treating her like a fragile little bird who needed constant attention. Meanwhile, I had to fend for myself, as if I didn't even exist. Stacy also played the victim, crying about her anxiety whenever things didn't go her way, and Dad always believes her. I've tried talking to him about it, but he shuts me down, saying I'm too harsh and don't understand what Stacy has been through. The truth is, I don't care what she's been through. All I know is that ever since she came into our lives, I've been cast aside like an unwanted toy. Every time I try to speak up, Stacy finds a way to turn the situation around and make herself look like the victim. Even my grandmother can't stand Stacy. She never approved of my dad marrying Claudia, but after my mom passed, she tolerated it for my dad's mental health. However, she's never liked Stacy, mainly because she clearly sees through her manipulations. My grandmother tried talking to my dad about this to remind him that I am his real daughter, but he doesn't listen. He's too focused on playing savior to see the damage he's doing to me. And now, as I lie here in this cold hospital bed, I can't help but feel completely alone. My leg is in a cast, bills are piling up, and I can't even count on my own father to be here. I try not to think too much about the accident, but it's hard. I've always been independent, always tried to handle things on my own, but this is different. I need help, and it hurts to know that the one person who should be here for me isn't. I have friends, sure, but they have their own lives and problems. The worst part is knowing my savings are running out. I've been paying for my university and living expenses on my own because I didn't want to rely on my dad's money, especially knowing it comes from my grandmother. But now, with hospital bills piling up, I don't know how I'm going to manage it all. I've already spent most of my savings to cover the initial costs, but I'm going to need more, and soon. I really don't know what to do. I have no idea. And well, that's why I'm here. The bills aren't going to disappear, and neither is this feeling of having been completely abandoned by the one person who's supposed to support me. I don't know what to do now. All I know is that my savings are running out, and if I don't find a way to pay all of this, I'm going to be in much bigger trouble than just a broken leg. I'm starting to feel lost about how to handle all of this. I'm really lost. Please, if you can, leave some advice in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. Update 1. It's Denise again. It's been 5 days since my initial post, and I'm happy to say that things have improved a bit. I didn't think I could get through this alone, but in the end, I didn't have to. After reading your comments and suggestions, I decided to try something I hadn't considered at first, asking my aunt for help. Yes, I know, she's my dad's sister, and even though we're not that close, I thought maybe she'd understand the situation better than anyone else. Everyone recommended that I seek help from a family member, and that's what I did. When I reached out to her, I wasn't expecting much. My aunt is a straightforward woman, and I thought she'd lecture me about being independent or something like that. But, to my surprise, she was willing to help. I explained everything to her, from the accident to how my dad abandoned me for Stacy, and immediately, she asked how much I needed to cover the hospital bill. I felt a huge relief. I didn't expect her to be so understanding, but I should have known she's always been more supportive of me than my own father. You know what I didn't expect? My grandmother's intervention. I thought my aunt would help, and that would be the end of it, but apparently, the news reached Grandma Jane's ears. When she found out what was happening, she was furious. She practically stormed into the hospital the next day, yelling that my dad was a disgrace and that she wasn't going to let this slide. Without a second thought, she paid off the hospital bill and told me to focus on recovering, that she would handle everything else. I won't lie, having my grandmother step in was a huge relief. I hadn't realized how much emotional weight I'd been carrying until it was lifted. It wasn't just about the money. It was about finally feeling like someone in my family had my back. My dad may have decided to go off with Stacy on that silly retreat, but at least my grandmother still sees me as her granddaughter, someone worth fighting for. Right now, I'm focusing on my recovery. The physical pain is still there, but it's manageable. I'm trying to take things slow, day by day. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel completely alone in this. My grandmother comes to see me every day, bringing food and making sure the nurses are attentive to my care. It's been comforting in a way I didn't expect. But there's a storm brewing. I can see that Grandma is angry. She hasn't said it outright, but I see it in her eyes and the way she talks about my father. I hear her muttering under her breath about how useless he is, and how he's wasting his life catering to Stacy's whims. And honestly, I don't know what will happen when Dad returns from the retreat. My grandmother controls the family's finances, and I can't help but think she'll take some action. She never liked Stacy or the way my father has treated me since Claudia came into our lives. Now that Stacy's manipulations are affecting more than just me, it seems like Grandma has reached her limit. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. Part of me fears the consequences when Dad comes back and has to face Grandma's wrath. But another part of me has a glimmer of hope, as if this could be the wake-up call he needs. Maybe, finally, he'll realize what he's been doing all these years, how he's been neglecting me while running after Stacy's fake crises. Either way, one thing is certain, I'm not going to sit around waiting for him to change. I have my own life to focus on, and now that I have my grandmother's and aunt's support, I finally feel like I have a support system. For now, I'm going to take things slow, focus on healing, and see how things play out when my dad comes back. I'll keep you updated on what happens. Update 2? It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened, though not in the way I expected. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't keep living at my dad's house, not that he'd even noticed I'd left. I wasn't expecting him to come back from that ridiculous retreat with Stacy and suddenly start caring about what's going on in my life. So, when my grandmother suggested I move in with her, I didn't think twice. The day I was discharged from the hospital, Grandma came to pick me up, but she didn't just take me to her house. She had already arranged for all my things to be packed and moved while I was still recovering in the hospital. I didn't have to lift a finger. It was as if she had planned everything, knowing perfectly well that my dad wouldn't even bother asking about me. And you know what? He hasn't. It's already been a week since he and Stacy came back from the retreat, and I haven't even received a message asking where I am or how I'm doing. It's like I've disappeared from his life, and he doesn't care. I'll admit, at first it hurt. I guess a part of me still hoped that maybe when he came back and found I wasn't home, he'd start to worry. But with each passing day, it becomes clearer that I was wrong. He's so absorbed in Stacy and her endless crises that he hasn't even noticed I'm no longer living with him. Honestly, I'm starting to feel indifferent about it. What does that say about him as a father if he doesn't even notice that his own daughter is no longer under his roof? Meanwhile, Grandma's anger has only grown. She's been holding back probably for my sake, but I can see it in the way she talks about my dad, saying things like, "I didn't raise him to be such a useless man." She keeps muttering that he's lost his mind and that Stacy has him completely under her control. I can't blame her. I feel exactly the same. But Grandma isn't the type to let things slide. She's planning to confront my dad, and I know it won't be pretty. Living with Grandma has been a completely different experience in the best way. For the first time, I'm in a place where I don't have to compete for attention or struggle to be seen. It's peaceful here, and even though I'm still recovering, I feel more at peace than I ever did in my dad's house. Grandma has been incredibly supportive, making sure I have everything I need and helping me get back on my feet financially. It's as if she's trying to make up for all the years my dad neglected me. And while it doesn't erase the pain, it definitely helps. Now I'm just focusing on moving forward. I've decided to take some time off from college to fully recover, both physically and mentally. It wasn't an easy decision, but it feels like the right one. I need to figure out what I want for my life, aside from the chaos that my dad and Stacy always bring. And with Grandma by my side, I finally feel like I have the space to do that. I'll keep you posted on what happens next. Update 3. I know many of you were waiting to hear about the confrontation. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and as you might imagine, things have taken a drastic turn. I'm still trying to process everything that happened and it feels surreal. But here's everything. Remember how I mentioned Grandma was planning to confront my dad? Well, she didn't waste any time. The day after my last update, she called him over to the house. It was intense to say the least. Grandma didn't wait a second to call him out on his irresponsible behavior. And as expected, my dad got defensive right away. He tried to justify his actions, saying he was doing the right thing by prioritizing Stacy's fragile mental health, as if the fragile health of my leg wasn't enough to make him worry. And if that wasn't enough, he had the nerve to suggest that the accident was partly my fault because, according to him, I was careless. He said I needed to pay attention because I am always distracted. I don't know what he meant by that, but it sounded like an excuse to avoid dealing with the problem. That hurt. I was barely out of the hospital, still recovering from injuries that could have been much worse, and my own father twisted the story to make it seem like it was all my fault. It was a new low, even for him, but Grandma wasn't going to tolerate it. She gave him an ultimatum. He had to choose his real family, meaning me, or his stepdaughter Stacy. This was his chance to decide, and he could have chosen either way. But my dad, in his stubbornness and complete disconnect from reality, laughed. He said the whole thing was ridiculous and walked out, as if it was some kind of joke. I think that's when Grandma realized how far gone he was. The man I once called my dad was so trapped in Stacy's manipulations that he couldn't see the reality right in front of him. After the confrontation, things were strange. Grandma expected my dad to come to his senses and realize what was at stake, but he did nothing. He didn't try to get in touch, didn't try to fix things, nothing. He went on with his life, oblivious to how close he was to losing everything. We gave him one last chance, but nothing changed. Finally, after weeks of silence, Grandma made her decision. She disinherited him, and she didn't stop there. She kicked him out of the house. What my dad conveniently forgot is that the house he was living in wasn't his. It was Grandma's. She owned it and had every right to kick him out. So she made it clear that he and Stacy were no longer welcome. He seemed surprised, as if he didn't really believe she'd do it. But she did. Later that same day, my dad came back to Grandma's house, desperately begging her to reconsider. He swore he'd change, promising he'd be a better father. But it was too late. Grandma told him to go ask Stacy for help, and warned him that if he came near again, she'd call the police. I know it sounds harsh, but after everything that happened, it felt like the right thing. I thought that would be the end, but my dad didn't give up. A few days later, he showed up at my college. I have no idea how he found out where I was, but he did. He must have been desperate. I was leaving class when I saw him standing at the entrance, disheveled and looking pathetic. He tried to stop me, pleading for another chance, saying he was going to lose everything. It was awkward and, to be honest, a little scary. I didn't know what to do at first, but I knew I couldn't let him drag me back into his mess. Luckily, campus security stepped in before things got worse. After that, Grandma and I decided to take legal action. We obtained a restraining order against him. It wasn't easy getting a restraining order against my own father, but I felt it was the only way to protect myself from future harassment. I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, worrying about when he'll show up again, trying to manipulate me and drag me back into his life. He's been bouncing from shelter to shelter, living on the streets now. But that's his fault. He never wanted to take responsibility for anything, and my grandmother has had enough of him. Update 4. It's been 2 years since I was last here, but I've recently distanced myself from all the drama with my father and Stacy, and honestly, I feel better for it. Moving away was one of the best decisions I've ever made. As soon as I finished my studies and an opportunity to move far away came up, I didn't hesitate. It took me literally 5 seconds to accept the offer. It wasn't just a professional opportunity, but also an escape route, something I desperately needed. However, my grandmother hasn't been as lucky. Despite my efforts to convince her to move with me, or at least to another city, I haven't been able to change her stance. She's one of those people who put down roots and can't imagine living anywhere else. I understand, though it hurts me that she's still so close to my father, although I think he should be more worried about my father than about her. You'll understand why when you read the rest of the update. During this time, I've barely heard anything about my father. The good news is that he has respected the restraining order. Apparently he found a job and has been living with Stacy, who's now 25. I mention this because it still seems strange to me that they continue living together, but at least now I know why. 4 days ago, my grandmother had an unexpected visit at her house. My father and Stacy showed up unannounced, and the first thing my grandmother noticed was that Stacy was pregnant. By instinct, my grandmother immediately assumed they'd come looking for help, probably money. So, without beating around the bush, she told them that if they came to ask for pity and money, they'd better leave the way they came because she wasn't going to help. What none of us expected was what my father was about to confess. With an almost surreal coldness, my father let out that he was the father of Stacy's unborn child. Yes, you read that right. My father was not only Stacy's stepfather, but now he's also the father of her child. That means that the baby Stacy is carrying is technically my half-brother or sister, or my grandmother's grandchild. According to my father's twisted logic, he tried to manipulate my grandmother with this, insinuating that Stacy was now part of the family and that the baby deserved compassion because it would be her blood grandchild. But my grandmother didn't fall for it. Instead of being moved, she became colder than ever. She remained silent for a second, as if processing the absurdity she just heard. Then, without losing her composure, she told my father something that left even me stunned when she told me. You have 5 minutes to get out of here because that's how long it takes me to go inside, load my gun, and shoot both of you if you don't leave right now. I know some people might criticize my grandmother for having a gun in the house, but it's nothing unusual for a southern woman like my grandmother. In her world, it's as normal as having a pan in the kitchen, and in situations like this, it's also useful. At first, my father thought she was joking. I'm sure he didn't expect my grandmother to be so blunt. Maybe he came intending to manipulate her, hoping his pleading tone and the absurd revelation about the pregnancy would manage to get some money out of her. But my grandmother wasn't fazed. She turned and started walking towards the house. That's when he and Stacy finally understood she wasn't kidding. When my grandmother looked over her shoulder after taking a few steps, they were already gone. I guess, at least this time, they had the sense to do the most reasonable thing and run. Now I understand why my father always favored Stacy. It wasn't just because she was his stepdaughter. At some point, she became his partner. She went from being my new stepsister to my new stepmother, or both, which is even more twisted. Just thinking about it makes me sick, and writing it now makes me feel like I'm going to lose my lunch. But I'll try to hold it together because I don't want to ruin my keyboard. My grandmother is even angrier than I am disgusted. She's convinced that my father deserves nothing from her. I don't have any money for him, she told me, but I do have several bullets with his name on them if he tries something like that again. Unfortunately, we can't file any complaint about the visit. The restraining order we got 2 years ago was only valid for 18 months, and we didn't renew it. But at this point, I think my father knows very well that he doesn't need a court order to stay away. If he has any common sense, he'll know that coming close again would be a terrible idea. That's how things stand now. It's strange to think that my stepsister became my stepmother, and that my father is expecting a child with her. My mind is still trying to process it all, and even though I feel far from the family drama, toxicity can travel miles. Update 5. My grandmother's threat definitely worked, because, since then, my father hasn't shown up at her house again. Honestly, I'm relieved. The idea of having to get my grandmother out of jail and hire a good lawyer wasn't something I wanted to face, though she wouldn't have hesitated to follow through on her warning if needed. However, even though my father has kept his distance, that doesn't mean we haven't heard things about him and Stacy. The most recent news is that Stacy lost her pregnancy, which was already quite advanced. I don't want to be misunderstood. I would never be happy about the loss of a pregnancy. I know how devastating it can be for a mother to be, and I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, not even Stacy. However, given the entire situation they're involved in, I sincerely think it wasn't the best thing for them to have a child together. Everything in this story has been one tragedy after another, and a baby would have only added more chaos, especially with my father involved. I'm neither happy nor sad about what's happened. It's just something I recently found out, and I feel this is my safe space to talk about it. Honestly, it's hard to process it all. It's still a strange and twisted situation, but at the same time, I can't help thinking that maybe this was some kind of intervention by fate, preventing a new life from being trapped in such a toxic environment. Now, I can only hope this serves as a wake-up call for them. I don't have much hope that my father will change, but maybe, just maybe, Stacy can find a way out of this tangled relationship and rebuild her life. Although, if she was capable of being with her late mother's husband, her stepfather, I don't have much hope for her either.